All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are here to attend the webinar of the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program uh, webinar. So a little housekeeping before we kind of get up and get started. Uh, if you've never been on a Zoom before or a webinar before, how this kind of works is we'll be talking to you, and then you can ask questions at any point in time. There's two different ways to ask those questions. You can either click on the chat box on the bottom of your screen and type it in there, or you can type on the Q&A box and type it in there. If you type it in the Q&A box, if it's a simple question that we might be able to answer that without stopping the speaker, and you'll get a response to it pretty quick. If you put it in the chat box, we'll have to, there's no real way to because it just kind of scrolls on top of itself. So we'll just have to answer that as we go. But we encourage you to ask as many questions as you want to ask. Guys, we'll stay here as long as you want to ask these questions. We have the relative experts in the field, and so we hope that you ask all that you can. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is J.J. Jones. I'm the area ag economist for the south central part of Oklahoma. And I'm just going to be the moderator of this little session, kind of watch the chat box and the question box, and make sure that things don't go haywire. I hope the person kind of in charge of running this thing is Dr. Amy Hagerman, and Amy came to us about a little over a year ago. She is the policy state specialist at, headquartered in Stillwater, and has done just a really outstanding job, and really happy to have her here. So with that, Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, JJ, and I really appreciate you helping to organize these things. I think we've got a really good panel of people to answer the questions you might have on this program. Just to get started, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of how this program came to be. Not very long, maybe about 5 minutes on that, and then we'll turn it over and really get immediately into the Q&A part of our webinar this morning. So just a little bit of background. This CFAP program actually came out of the CARES Act. You might have seen that there's been a variety of pieces of legislation that have been passed for coronavirus assistance. The CARES Act was actually the third piece of that, but it's the only one that was specifically associated with agriculture, and then it had programs for agriculture in it. The CARES Act set aside $9.5 billion for direct producer payments, plus an infusion of another $14 billion into the CCC fund. The reason that's important is that whenever we look at these CFAP payments, if you look at the tables of rates or things like that, for that $16 billion in producer payments for CFAP, they're actually broken into the CARES Act and the CCC money. The reason is that it's unusual to have a program where you really have two different authorizations that go into a program, and you have to track that money separately. But at the end of the day, the important thing to remember is that it will be a single payment that comes to all of you. The CFAP itself is setting aside $16 billion in direct producer payments. And then there's another $3 billion in purchases of produce, meat, and dairy that are going to go into need-based programs like food pantries, faith-based organizations, things like that. So just bear in mind here as you see these terms, CARES Act money and CCC money, at the end of the day, that's one payment that's coming to you. It just has to be tracked a little differently because it is coming under two different authorizations. This is just an example from the crops table that shows the rates that would be paid. Trent's going to talk about this in more detail as an example. And of course, Scott Biggs and Josh Lundy from FSA are going to be talking in more detail about how these programs work. But this is I just wanted you to see an example of why that CARES versus CCC thing was worth pointing out early in our process. The second thing I will say is that you really want to put in a timely application on this. FSA is definitely at work and ready, and we really appreciate our partners there for this webinar and for helping all the producers in all of Oklahoma. So really balance that timely, getting your application in a timely manner with a really accurate application. There's some tools that make this a lot easier to apply for than you know, some of our other programs that have a little bit more of an administrative burden on them. So really make sure you've got that application as accurate as possible and get it in as timely a manner as possible. The final thing I'll just say is this is an interim final rule, and that means it is subject to change. There's a way to actually put in some more information on additional changes that need to be made. Some examples are, we might see some additional commodities. For example, nursery products and cut flowers have already been mentioned as an area where USDA would like to receive feedback on these programs. And we certainly have some of those producers here in the state. Also, changes in current commodities. You will talk a little bit later about the definition of fed cattle, and there's some changes that are probably in the works around that. So if there's anything that seems to not be working here, definitely take advantage of that process to actually submit comments on this program. So that's all I was really going to say on the front end of this. I am going to turn it over to Mr. Scott Biggs from the State FSA office for more information. I'm going to stop my share, Scott. And his information is there for you all as he's coming up too.
Thank you very much, Amy and Dr. Hagerman. I appreciate the opportunity. And let me tell you, the 58 people who are attending this, you're in for quite a treat. We had a dry run of this at 2 o'clock, so we are definitely experts at this now. So appreciate the opportunity on behalf of myself and the 335 FSA employees we have here in Oklahoma. We just want to say thank you, and we are here and able to help the producers across the state. Like I mentioned, when I had to change that, we've hired a few temps and we put on a significant number of people. All 335 of us are working in one direction at this point, and that's to help producers have access to programs such as this CFAP program to get the money in their hand as quick as possible and do what we need to do. I appreciate everybody taking a few times out of their evening tonight. You're going to hear from Mr. Josh Lundy, and one of my best CEDs I have across the state. He comes from Alabama and brought with us a lot of knowledge from there, and it definitely fit in Oklahoma and can give us, he's going to walk you through what to expect when you go to county office, because what we're seeing is a significant number of new producers or first-time people calling FSA, showing some interest in this program. So Mr. Lundy, thank you for taking time tonight, time away from your family to visit with these attendees. And looking at this example, I know we got some experts. So Dr. Amy, you said Josh and I were the experts. We got Daryl Peel on here. Dr. Peel, thank you for joining us. We all know what you've been doing, and thank you for the work, and Dean Kuhn as well. So with that, let me get started. Oklahoma FSA has a tremendous number of programs right now. So I know we want to focus on CFAP, but I want to remind everybody that we have a lot of other programs going on as well, from our farm loans to our disasters to our ARC PLC. We are here with a number of products available to help the producers get through these times. Just because all the focus is on CFAP and will be on CFAP for about 4 weeks, we want to make sure everybody's aware that there are plenty of opportunities. If you need help, please reach out. So as I discuss this program a little bit, I want you to listen for 2 things and try to take 2 things away from it. Number 1 is the tool. It was kind of mentioned earlier that there's a tool out there that provides some help, some guidance, and it is an excellent tool. I have to say we borrowed from OSU Extension and the tool that they did for the ARC PLC sign up. Met with producers and kind of directed them one way or another. We copied that and have created an Excel sheet for this program with drop-down menus, places to put it in. And what's even nice about this program is there's a small little button you can click that'll print off your application, save your application. So all the information you enter into the Excel sheet transfers over to the FSA application. And it's something you can click, you can save, you can email right away. So that's the one thing I want you to take away is make sure you know that that tool is available, it will assist, and it will be a tremendous asset to you and the county offices. The second thing that was definitely mentioned was this was an interim rule. So there is the opportunity to provide feedback. I know that, especially here in Oklahoma, and today I spent a lot of time discussing the dates. I know from my first webinar, there was a lot of confusion around the dates, especially in the cattle industry. Those dates have been announced. However, the opportunity for public comment is open and available, and that public comment closes on June 22nd. So you're going to hear me refer a lot to the farmers.gov webpage, a website, and I know Dr. Hageman's going to actually share that for us here when we get in the middle of it. But there's a link on there to the public comment position on farmers.gov on the CFAP application where you can make public comments. And the other thing she's pointing out there is right there in the middle of the screen is a CFAP payment calculator. That is the link to the tool. So I want to stress that enough. Those are the two things I hope you take away from this presentation. CFAP, what is it? It's the Corona Food Assistance Program that come to us via CARES. It was correctly noted that there is two pots of money from this, both the CARES Act money and the CCC, which we use mainly for our disaster programs. So over the next 4, 5, 6 weeks, USDA is going to help administer close to $19 billion in CCC and CARE Act, and then some direct purchases of food to donate to homeless shelters. So a lot of money getting into producers' hands here in the next 4 to 5 weeks. Got two separate things we need to talk about. The first off is going to be crops, and there's two sections of crops, and the second is going to be livestock. So let's hit the easy one first, and the crops. And when I say crops, it's broken down into your traditional row crops here in Oklahoma. That's going to be corn and soybeans, millet, sorghum are eligible. I'll just get this out there right now. Hard red winter wheat is not eligible at this time. I know that's a mainstay in Oklahoma. However, not to get into too much specifics, all these crops eligibility are based on the futures market. And you did see a rebound in hard red winter wheat there right at the very end when we were estimating this. And rather than a 5% loss, it was only about 2.5. So that is the reason hard red winter wheat is out of the program at this time. But I want to stress this is an interim rule. Public comment is open till June 22nd. So if you have some thoughts or some concerns on that, please, by all means, use that opportunity. The second thing is the rose crops. It goes off your 2019 production that is on hand in January. So that's production you've had that you've not sold is what is going to be eligible. So I want to point out that not all crops, not all row crops are going to be eligible in Oklahoma. Hard red winter wheat is out, but as far as corn, soybean, millet, sorghum, those are eligible based on your 2019 production and on-hand inventory in January. The second crops is eligible is specialty crops. And we got Mr. Lundy on here. He's from Calving County. He's kind of an expert in specialty crops, especially around pecans. So pecans have become eligible for MFP. They've become eligible for WIP. And here we are once again, pecans in Oklahoma are going to be eligible for CFAP. So we do have a lot of specialty crops that are going to be eligible. And this program is one, you got your traditional farmers, and then you got your urban farmers, your high tunnel hoop houses, some specialty farmers like that. This program is available to everyone, no matter the size, no matter the crop, if it's one of the eligible crops. We really want to focus, and we got some farm to fork people I took calls from today, some specialty lettuce type people. So this program is going to be wide open. And if it's one of the listed crops, if it's not, there's a process we can go through to see if you may be eligible. So crops we have our traditional row crops and our specialty crops. The livestock aspect of this program is where we spent most of our time answering questions on, especially on the cattle side. There are two parts to the cattle side. We have cattle sold between January and April 15th. Now the April 15th deadline is one that we've been getting a lot of calls on, a lot of questions. That date was set by DC without much input from the local level. However, As it was mentioned, this is an interim rule, and there's an opportunity for public comment if you feel strongly about that issue. So you have cattle sold, and then you also have your highest inventory. So all cattle that you had on hand from April 16th to May 14th is eligible for a payment. Now there is a discrepancy in the payments. The cattle sold, you get to use the CARES Act money. The highest inventory comes from the CCC pot of money. So I think that's why we touched a little bit on the difference up front, is because there is a significant difference in payment, as you're going to see from a few examples. And then I want to, there's some other specialty crops, other livestock that are included. The main one we're seeing right now in Oklahoma, a lot of questions on is the cattle. So Dr. Hageman, that's kind of my spiel that I got through before I started getting a lot of questions last time. Am I missing? Are we getting any this time?
We've had one specific question associated with the tool. If you want to address that now, let me, in the Q&A, and JJ had told him that we would hold off a little while until we get into the actual calculator if you wanted to.
Okay. So the question is, did new calves qualify for full payment? Well, it depends on what you mean by full payment, but calves do qualify. As you look through the tool there, anything that was born can be counted into your inventory. It doesn't have to be weaned cattle. I know there's been some of our programs had a big difference there. So as you go through the example of the Excel sheet, there's all other cattle, feeder cattle under 600 pounds, feeder cattle over 600 pounds. So there is a category there. So a cow-calf pair is actually going to count twice into your highest inventory. So they will receive a payment. Now, like I mentioned, what your question is full payment. I don't know exactly what you mean by full payment. The other thing I forgot to point out is these payments, FSA is administering these payments in 2 rounds. Just like we had MFP and we had several rounds of payments that went out on MFP, we're doing the same thing on this. You'll receive, first payment is 80% of your anticipated payment, and then we'll see where everything lays out. And a second round of payment, 20%, may be available if we have enough funds. So I want to point that out up front. When you see a number, it's the 80% of your payment is what you'll get in the first payment. So, but the calves, yes, the cow counts. The calf, if it was born in the window, counts as well. So, ways you can get this Excel sheet. There are 2 ways. Farmers.gov is our website, our portal. As everybody knows, we do have 335 employees, but a lot of them are teleworking in this time. We're in the process of restaffing some of our offices, but a lot of this is going to be done remotely via email, via telephone. This farmers.gov website is where we're seeing a lot. The second thing is we have, as you can see right there, is a 1-800, it's 877 number. And I want to stress that quite a bit. Our county offices' phones are ringing off the hook. Josh, Mr. Lundy, our CD, is going to tell you about how many phone calls he got all day. I know how many we got here. So if you're having trouble reaching your county office, if you're a new producer and have questions, we do have this call center set up to help visit. Now at 3 o'clock, I did a staffing on the call center, and at 3 o'clock today, we had over 1,800 calls to the call center, both from existing producers to new producers. It was about 6-to-1 ratio. So we're seeing a significant interest from new producers that have never participated in FSA. So that's one way, farmers.gov. The second way is I can email you. I know earlier in the conversation, the last presentation, people gave me their email addresses, and I had the application and Excel sheet emailed out to them before we shut it down. So if you're one of those and would like to have the Excel sheet here today, simply type your email address into the chat. I can email it to you directly, or there may be a mass email from OSU Extension later on this evening if that's of interest as well. So 2 places to get it, email or this farmers.gov website. The other thing I want to preference is if you are a new producer and have never participated in the FSA program, you're going to see a list of probably 10 documents that we're going to require. And please do not get overwhelmed. Some of those just deal with the entity. Some of those deal with adjusted gross income. All these are something that a normal producer would fill out on an annual basis or whenever they come in to register. Please do not get overwhelmed. We'll walk you through the process. We'll help you get those applications filled out. Some of them just simply have 3 or 4 places in the signature. So please don't get overwhelmed by seeing that. If you're an existing producer that goes into FSA on a regular basis, we probably have almost all these forms in place and just simply need your CFAP application, which is automatic if you use the tool. So with that, please keep in mind, don't get overwhelmed. All 335 employees are working and we're here to help. The one thing I can stress to you, we don't know what you need unless you call and ask us. So if you call and you have a problem, if you have something you need, please call and ask because we'll be more than happy to find you an answer to it. So Dr. Hageman, any other questions or is it time for Mr. Lundy?
Well, we certainly got a lot of people who have put in a request to actually have the spreadsheet sent to them. So I think that there's a lot of good information being shared in the chat box toward all of you for that. But otherwise, I haven't seen any questions. I don't know if there's anything you specifically wanted to point out, but if it is helpful, this is what the spreadsheet looks like. So, and I don't know if you want to go into that or if Josh wants to go into that for his part, but I just thought I would pull it up so people could see kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, this is the Excel sheet. You can see there, it's very simple. You enter in a few informations. What I really like, as you go down, and it has drop-down menus under the commodities, it lists everything in there for you. So we try to make this as simple as possible, giving that everybody is teleworking. I know FSA's built on relationships, and there's a lot of relationships that take place in our office where you sit down and visit and have coffee. This is unusual, this is new, but this process is going to get money out the door as quick as possible. So these drop-down menus help you select everything, and it all puts it in there. And I will let Mr. Lundy talk about what to expect when you go to an FSA office.
We did have a few questions if you want to address those, Scott.
Sure, either one of us can take them. Yep.
Oh, yeah, either one of you. One of the questions is from Justin Wagner, who was asking, could he just print these out for producers and have them fill it out at the extension office? That was one question.
I don't know. I mean, print them out. So we're doing drop boxes now. So if somebody wants to print them out, fill them out, they can contact their local service center and do a drop box. Which one of these do we help them fill out? The Excel sheet is the main one. That is the application that is needed. The other documents are more eligibility based. So if they're existing producer, they've already had those. If not, there is some eligibility that needs to go down.
And I'd like to add a little comment with the sign up after seeing some today is we're getting some applications in, but the producer says they don't know how to classify their cattle, but they're putting their signature at the bottom of the application. And we can't accept that application until we have those numbers in the application with the signature of the producer on there. So you're going to be better off just calling us and telling us your inventory numbers or telling us what you have sold between January 15th and April 15th, because if the numbers aren't in the application, although we have your signature on an application, we have to get you to verify those numbers that are on there. We can't just take the application and us fill it in with your signature on there. So it'd be better for you to actually contact us or call us or use this spreadsheet, and it will put your information in for you. either way. But, you know, if you do have any questions, just contact us.
So as a follow-up to that, one of the questions in the Q&A is, when entering your inventory of cattle, do you need to list inventory according to weight, or is it just for sales? Like, do you need to do under 600, over 600 for your inventory, or is that just for your sales?
No, that's for inventory and sales. So your sales between January 15th and April 15th need to be broken into the weight classes that are specified, and also your current inventory or your highest inventory between April 16th and May 14th also need to be broken down, which your calves that are on your mother cows will be the less than 600, and, you know, so forth and so on. So, but yes, we don't want just a number for your current inventory. We would also like those broken into weight classes.
Okay, and I think that answers Dana's question as well, because she was also asking about, for inventory numbers, does it need to be classified, or can it simply be all other cattle? And it sounds like it needs to be classified.
Yes.
It really fits in that category of other cattle.
Absolutely.
The second question is related to crops, and it's, how do we prove how many bushels we had on hand January? Well, they said January 1, but it's January 15, right, for the crops?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. It's January 15th. And what we are looking for there is your 2019 production, minus however much you've sold or marketed before now. So it's the only your on-hand production that is eligible. So there has to be some type of way to prove your production, and then how much you've sold. I want to stress, I didn't cover it very well, and I'm sorry, Josh, if you're going to cover it, but this is all self-certification. Usually we even require an acreage report to participate in any of our programs. Anybody who knows FSA, we rely on the acreage report more than anything else. To participate in this CFAP program, we are not requiring an acreage report this year. So this program is strictly a self-certification program as far as your cattle numbers and as far as your crops. And now I can tell you, and we got into a little bit on the earlier webinar, kind of things we look for to help prove production or prove livestock, our sales receipts, vet records, any other good record-keeping items will be needed. Because under the 2014 LFP, that was a self-certification in Oklahoma. And then we spent 2 years doing site checks and, I wouldn't say audits, but verifying for 2 years after. So while this is self-certification, I would stress that we have the documentation to help shore that up in case something would happen moving forward.
So then, Josh, it looked like this next Q&A one is really kind of for you. What is reporting county, and is that same as control county? And then as a follow-up, if someone's in a different state, can they report to their local FSA and have them send that report to the reporting county? So it sounds like that's getting into some of the details you were going to cover with your part as well. So maybe you take it away and can answer those questions as you go along.
Okay. As far as those questions go, the recording county, the control county is per producer. The control county, we usually talk about the actual farm itself, and then but the people that are going to approve these applications are where the producer are actually carried at. So yes, they have made this where a producer turns in everything that any kind of farm interest that they have. If they have cattle in 3 or 4 different states, we're going to run one application. But their recording county for that producer is the one that will actually approve the application. So yes, they should be able to, the county office, their recording county needs to be aware that they have put an application in, but it should show up, since they are on the recording county, it should show up in the software and give us the opportunity to approve it. But we only want to run one application per producer. So, you know, if you have farming interest in Texas and in Oklahoma, we're just going to put everything into one application. I was kind of asked to, you know, to give an overview of what you would expect when you come in an FSA office. I'm hoping that actual coming in part will be in the very near future, because that makes it a lot easier for us. But, you know, one thing we try to start out trying to figure out what kind of operation people have or what kind of operation people want. As Scott mentioned earlier, CFAP is a great program, and I'm hoping we can get this money out the door really fast, because I know producers are hurting. But we also offer a lot of other programs that can help producers throughout the year. A lot of them are going to be based off of disasters, or you know, we have the ARC PLC if your farm has base acres on it. But, you know, the Scott mentioned, and I think Amy even mentioned it, but a lot of the eligibility things that we're going to have to get you in here are required for CFAP. And if you go to farmers.gov, it's about a little over halfway down. They're all listed. There's the 901, the 941, and the 3881 for direct deposit. Yes, right there. All those are listed, and thankfully a lot of producers that have called today have already filled a lot of those out. So I you know, the 1026, and the 2047 is the basic that just gets you in our system. We have to have that before we can run any application or do anything with you. So you know, if you're looking to apply for CFAP or for any other program, having these right here completed would put you way ahead of the game when you call the office if you already had these done. You know, we also, a lot of new producers, we're going to have to be doing a lot of follow-up. As Scott mentioned earlier, there's not an acreage report required. We don't have to tie you to a farm number, the actual land that you own or lease, but we would like to. We can take a deed or a lease, tie you to that piece of property, give you an aerial map of it, and then sign you up for programs that we offer. We offer insurance for grazing grass, for wheat for grazing, for pecans, anything RMA does not cover. You know, we offer LFP is a drought program I'm sure many people are familiar with, but you know, it's supposed to help supplement on the hay that you'll be short of since we are in a drought. Livestock indemnity program is another really good program. Natural disasters that cause death of livestock, a lot of times we can cover that livestock and at least give you some type of supplement to help replace the livestock. You know, a lot of our programs are disaster based, but in a disaster is usually when you're needing help. So that's a lot that we can do for producers. You know, I guess the only other thing I want to mention is and it's been touched on, but the cattle, if you can get on farmers.gov, it's been mentioned by all of us, but there is a lot of good information. If you can get those categories divided up before you call your FSA office, it will make the process for us a lot easier, and it'll get you your money a lot quicker. You know, if you already have that, we could even possibly go ahead and run your application and then email you or mail you or fax you or whatever it takes to get it to you, your application and the eligibility forms, and we can get that all in one swipe so we could get you paid and approved as quick as possible. So that's what we're looking at. I've had 262 missed calls today. We've taken a lot of calls. I think we've started almost 50 applications today between the employees in just my office, and so it's going to be busy, and we are doing absolutely all we can. As Scott mentioned, we are all headed in the same direction right now. We're kind of putting some other stuff on the back burner and we're going to be focused on getting this out as quick as possible. And you have the hotline you can call, your local county office. And if you don't get the answer you like from them, just call Scott, and he'll answer your question. But that's about all I got. Any questions, please just type them up or just whatever you need to do.
Yeah, I think you got a handful here, Josh. The first is, will the producer receive confirmation when the application is filed? And is there any tracking after filing?
Now, I'm not aware of any tracking after filing. Scott, you hop in here if you're aware of anything like that.
Sure. So the producer, when you say receive confirmation, you're going to have to contact the local service center and talk to a CD such as Mr. Lundy to file the application. So that's going to be your confirmation, is contacting the local service center, either emailing it, or most offices or every office will have a drop box. We're not taking in-person appointments at this time. I do not see us taking in-person appointments at least for the next 2 weeks. So email or a drop box are going to be the only two ways you can drop off that application. But I can assure you that there's not going to be a need for tracking. Once a completed application is received, it's going to be processed as quick as possible. We're going to look to have payments rolling out the door. We can have 2 weeks after an application's turned in. For Oklahoma, for example, we've set a goal amongst ourselves to have everything, all applications in, processed 4 to 5 weeks. That gets the money out the door as quick as possible. So as Josh said, we're all hands on deck moving in the right direction, trying to get this stuff out the door here before the end of June. So
Yes, absolutely.
Second question, where do we find our farm number? Mr. Payne, that farm number is from your acres report, and that is something we're not requiring to participate in this program. However, as you call the local office, they'll be more than happy to walk you through that process. I know Mr. Lundy mentioned he encourages you to apply. Whenever you need something, you're going to need to bring in a copy of your deed or a copy of the lease, probably email them those to help get that going. But we definitely want to get it in the system, cut down the amount of paperwork you have to do next time around. So. And then the third final question, do we send it via email? We normally used processed without an appointment, or do we need to have an appointment to present supporting livestock inventory documents? Okay, so compound question there. Yes, email the application is best because we're not taking in-person appointments at this time. The office you normally used, well, that depends on your situation. So Mr. Lundy mentioned you got some controlling counties, and we got multi-state producers, multi-county producers. Basically contact your local service center and make sure and double check where you need to be submitting that application. Especially if it's in Oklahoma, everybody knows what's everybody else's game plan. We're all on the same game plan. But if you're one of the few multi-state producers we have, especially around Southwest Oklahoma, the Panhandle, you do definitely need to be contacting us because not all states are handling applications nor application process the same way. The program's the same, but some states are doing it different. Do you need to have an appointment to present supporting livestock inventory documents? Not at this time. I want to stress this program is self-certifying. So if you say you have a certain number, that's all we need at this point is your self-certification. Now, I would highly encourage people to have supporting documents available in case they are needed. But at this point in time, there's no appointment needed to present those. This is all self-certification moving forward. Is that all the questions?
That's all we have open right at this moment. There were a few other little ones that had kind of popped in that have already been answered. So, whoop, I think I had one more jump in here. Yeah, you've got one more in the Q&A.
How do you determine, well, okay, so I guess we do have one of those multi-state producers on here. So the best thing is to contact your local service center. Usually that is what we classify as where your headquarters is. So it's whatever your home address is, start with that county. and then go from there and see what's the best situation. But I can tell you Oklahoma and Texas are doing it. Everybody's administering the program the same. Oklahoma does have the goal to get this out in 4 to 5 weeks, which is not the case for some other states. So call your local service center as quick as possible, and they'll get you going in the right direction. Second, where do we sign the Excel sheet? So the Excel sheet is a great tool. There's actually no signature needed on that Excel sheet. What'll happen is as you get everything entered into there and you get down towards the bottom, you're going to see 4 or 5 tabs over on the left-hand side. One of them is to print. So what you'll actually do is that you'll hit print, and that'll populate all that information onto the application for you. And you're not having to fill out another government form. The Excel sheet moves it over, you hit print, you sign, you email that in, and you're done. So there's no need to sign the tool sheet.
Give it a minute for any other questions to roll in. Guys, if you have specific questions about examples, we're going to have a few examples that are brought up here in a minute for how to handle different kinds of situations. So if you have any other questions, kind of just general application questions, now is your moment to get those in while Mr. Scott Clausen is bringing up some examples for cattle production. After that, we'll also have other kinds of livestock, a specialty crops kind of example, and then some corn and soybean examples as well. Well, I guess all crops. Trent will be covering a lot of different crops. That tool makes it really handy, folks, to be able to look at multiple things at once. All right, so I mostly just see, we got another Q&A question, Scott.
I was cheating. I was typing him an answer. I have not.
Okay.
This is actually the first time I've heard of an error with the worksheet. So this is definitely something I need to. So Mr. Kimball, I am sending you my email address and phone number. I can tell you right now, the people that run that Excel sheet have gone for the day. But if you have time tomorrow, I'd be more than happy to walk you through, because like I said, this is the first I've heard of any type of error, and let's get to the bottom of it as quick as possible.
Oh. There you go, Scott.
Thank you, ma'am.
Take it away.
Okay, so we had some folks mention that they couldn't hear me real well earlier this morning. I think we fixed it. So if you cannot hear me very well, make sure and put that in the chat and I will start yelling. We'll look at some of the cattle specific examples. And so I think it's important to look at these things separately, these two programs or two pools of money that will be making payments. And I think that will allow kind of producers to mentally make a separation as to, okay, well, this part doesn't apply to me, or maybe it does, so I should, make sure I'm listening to that part, or vice versa. Because there's two really separate things happening here, as Amy mentioned earlier. One is that the CARES Act money is paid on sales. And in that time frame from January 15th to April 15th, if you did not market cattle during that time period, then this pool of money is not going to apply to you. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind. The cattle that are sold in this time period from January 15th to April 15th, you had to have owned those cattle previously. So as long as you owned those cattle, cows, calves, bull calves, whatever it is, as long as you owned them prior to January 15th, then they would be eligible under this program. If you purchased them after January 15th, let's say, for example, you bought these cattle on February 1st and turned around and sold them on April 1st, none of that would apply. The program wouldn't apply to you. So we need to keep in mind the ownership rule for this specific pool of money is by January 15th. So one of the things that is mentioned, has been mentioned a few times, is what do we do about calves born? And so if we have
let's say a cow that we've owned for 2 years, and she calved on January 25th, and maybe we sold them as a pair or sold the calf off a few months later for whatever reason, as long as it was before that April 15th time period, then that would be allowed, or you would receive a payment for that sale. But the first part of the CARES Act funding here is only for cattle that were sold. The second part that we'll look at is based on inventory. So at this point, sales isn't the issue. We're focused strictly on what is our current inventory through that time period. That time period is April 16th through May 14th. So this set of money is paid on your highest point of inventory in that time frame. So for instance, let's say you purchased 2 bulls on May 1st. Well, at your high point in inventory, those would count into that inventory calculation, even though you may have just purchased them. So the inventory at that point is just based on what do you own during that April 16th and May 14th time period. And that is not a sales period. So just remember, if you were selling cattle on April 16th, 20th into May, that's not going to qualify for any of the Part 1 money because it's after that time period. But if they were in your inventory, it sure might count in the CCC part of the money during that time period. So if we look at what those measurements are, or those payment amounts are, we'll look at this specific or particular table, and you'll see the CARES Act Part 1, which is your funding that is based on your sales through that time period. You'll see each one of those categories, how much that is. And you see on the second part, we'll see the CCC payments based on our inventories. So we need to do some kind of defining of what some of these things are. So the feeder cattle less than 600 pounds and feeder cattle 600 pounds or more, that's pretty explanatory. So that calf that's still on the cow would count as a less than 600 feeder calf, and the cow would count as all other cattle. Then we've got the 2 segments of slaughter cattle and then the all other cattle grouping. So what do those mean exactly? So slaughter cattle fed is, think of more as the feedlot cattle. So these are the cattle that are in a feed yard, or you're being fed or fed at the house, whatever it might be. The number that's put out there is in excess of 1,400 pounds on average. So that is one of those things that's kind of a gray area as this sits right now. And it's something that's probably being looked at, but at this point, that's the number. Then slaughter cattle mature. So this group would be any of those cattle. Let's say, for instance, you pulled some open cows and sold them as cull cows on February 1st, which is in that January 15th to April 15th time period. Those would be listed as slaughter cattle mature. So these are maybe that were breeding animals, but are being removed from inventory and intended for slaughter. So that would fall into that particular group. So that's where our cull animals that are mature end up. All other cattle is generally where your breeding inventory will fall. So this is going to be your cows that are in production, your bulls that are in production, all those types of animals that are still out there in production. So what does kind of normal operation look like? So this is an example of a fall calving cow-calf operation. So we're going to assume that in this case that we did not sell any cattle from January 15th to April 15th. We didn't sell cattle. So this is what our kind of payment calculation might look like. We're going to have those cows that are currently in our inventory. We had 60 head of those. We would have those listed into that Excel spreadsheet as all other cattle. You'll notice that the CARES Act payment rate's not available because we didn't sell those cows, but the payment rate for our CCC funding, which is that inventory number from the middle of April to the middle of May, we get $33 per head, and we see the total there. Let's assume we had 55 calves that are on the side of those cows, and they're not weaned yet, which really doesn't matter. We kind of, in some of the examples, we've gotten hung up on that a few times, but it doesn't really matter. They're under 600 pounds, let's say. And those are all the cows on side. We didn't sell them yet, so there's no payment for the CARES Act Part 1, but we do have them in inventory. So you'll see our calves at side get another $33 a head there. And then we've got 2 breeding bulls, which on that spreadsheet would be listed as all other cattle. We've got 2 of them. So we'd see with no sales that period, this is what we would have entered in that spreadsheet. Again, cows is all other cattle, bulls is all other cattle, unweaned calves would be feeder cattle under 600 pounds. So if a more common operation in Oklahoma would be more like a spring calving operation. And this is essentially what theirs might look like as well, assuming that they calved prior or during or before that mid-May endpoint for those cattle. So let me re-say that. That was a little messy. So if I had 60 spring calving cows, I would be able to count my calves that hit the ground in that inventory window from mid-April to mid-May. Okay, those would count additionally. So we get to use that. But for generally speaking, we're not going to have sales to that period for spring cow-calf operations. And so it would look very similar to that that we show there. But what if we did? So in this case, we'll go back to our fall calving cow-calf operation. And let's say the same scenario took place, except we sold calves. We'll just pick a date. We'll say we sold calves on March 15th. So in this case, we have our same breeding cows there, all other cattle on our spreadsheet. We've got 60 head. We get that payment rate for inventory. Remember, we sold those unweaned calves at that point. And so we now have sales through that time period from the middle of January to the middle of April. And that payment rate for feeder cattle under 600 pounds is $102 a head. And so you'll see how drastically that does change our payment through that period. And our bulls are obviously the same. So again, if we look back at something like this, if we had sold maybe some cull cows, gotten rid of a bull during that period, that would be entered under the payment rate for the CARES Act and slaughter cattle mature, because that's where our cold breeding animals are ending up. So what about the stocker operation?
Scott, real quick, you got a question in the Q&A,
Yeah.
or maybe for the other Scott, I'm not sure which, but it says, do dairy cattle do not qualify, but do Holstein steers qualify?
I may need to defer on that one.
Josh or Scott Biggs, do you guys have some feedback on Holstein steers qualifying for the cattle program that the other Scott Clausen is talking about now?
Well, you hit us with a question that no one has asked all day long. So, Mr. Butler, I will find out the exact answer for you and have it emailed to you first thing tomorrow morning.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. You kind of hit me on the head there with the dairy deal. I knew the answer to that, but the curveball left is my strike zone there pretty fast. Okay, so let's look at the wheat pasture cattle, because this is obviously a pretty common occurrence west of 35 this year. So let's say, for example, that we brought cattle off of wheat and we marketed those cattle. We sold those cattle on February 27th. So we have 200 head. They weighed over 600 pounds. We would receive the CARES Act funding, the first part of that funding, at $139 a head. Now, if we think about kind of the time periods at play here, we know that we're not going to get a CCC payment on those cattle because they left our inventory at the end of February, so they weren't around for the next period. So we don't get a payment there. And so, as they've said before, you're going to get an 80% payment first. So that comes out to just over $22,000. Now, remember that we're assuming that these cattle were owned prior to January 15th. So maybe we turned them out in the fall or something like that. If the cattle were purchased after that time period, then they're not eligible for that funding. So what the other option would be, if we had pulled those cattle off weed at the end of February and we decided to hold on to those cattle and feed them for a little bit as we waited to see what kind of took over in the market. Those feeder cattle weighed over 600 pounds. Since they weren't sold before the end of that time period in mid-April, we don't get a payment rate on the first part of the CARES Act funding. They are now in our current inventory, okay, through that mid-April to mid-May time period. So we get a $33 per head payment there. And so, as we mentioned, you know, kind of that pivotal date there in the middle of April, this really explains why, because that does take makes a pretty significant difference in what the payment would be to the producer. So one portion of this that is important to remember is that cattle have to have been unpriced. So what is that specifically stating? Well, specifically, they could not have been forward contracted. So if the cattle had been forward contracted ahead of this price move, then they're not eligible for a payment at that point. And I saw the question pop up there, and I sure don't mind to take a stab at it. And Scott or Josh, feel free to correct me, but as far as taking cattle in on the gain, and I would assume that is only the livestock owner, as he's the one would be the party at risk for the price declines or at significant price risk.
There was a couple of questions in the Q&A as well, Scott.
Okay. So what about calves that you have on feed backgrounding? So I am assuming that you are being paid a backgrounding rate and that the ownership of those cattle are still with somebody else. You may need to kind of clarify that.
It might be a little further down. There was a follow-up by Carl that says they were owned before January 1 and have not sold yet.
Okay. So if they were owned prior to that period by you, if they're owned by you, then yes, they would be eligible as long as you're getting paid on your high inventory through that mid-April to mid-May. So that's going to be your reference point. They would be eligible for the $33 as a part of your inventory through that month.
And then a similar question came up in the chat window, which was similarly for calves that were born between April 17th and that May 14th. Would they count in the inventory?
Yes, they do count in your inventory. Yes. So you would assume that if you're a cow-calf operator, assume it'll get me in trouble, but you would assume that your high point inventory, if you're a cow-calf operator that's calving in the spring, is going to be that last day of May that you're eligible. So May 15th, as that is when you would have the most calves on the ground, unless you've marketed cattle in some other way prior to that.
Okay, any other questions on the cattle side before we move on to other livestock? JJ can go ahead and start queuing up his slides for the other livestock. There looks like there's one more in the Q&A, Scott, for you. You're muted.
So heifers on inventory, I would assume that if they're not breeding age yet, would qualify as your bigger feeder cattle, is where they would specifically go. I think for FSA's sake, they would like you to have that in the right category, but for your payment rate, there's going to be the same. But I would assume that they would, if they're not mature and in production, they're going to qualify as feeder cattle over 600 pounds. But again, they can sure jump in and correct me if they need to.
Okay, JJ, you're in presenter mode, just so you're aware. But now JJ is going to transition us from cattle into other kinds of livestock and then touch on the specialty crops as well. And then after that, we'll move into Trent to give some examples on the non-specialty crops.
Is that better? Just still presenter mode.
Give it a second. It appears to be a little frozen.
A little frozen. Okay. Let's see here. How about now? Oh, no, now it kicked me all the way back out. Let's see here.
That's better.
All right. So what I've got for some reason is all these boxes blocking my view, so I can't read. Okay. So here we go. So I get to talk to you about other livestock, especially crops. I drew the short straw. And I realize that, some of this probably not going to be relevant to most of you, but we're going to go ahead and discuss it just a little bit. So with that being said, we'll try to advance this here a little bit. For some reason, don't want to. There we go. First of all, let's start off with talking about hogs and sheep. Before we get too far into this, goats, so I've got to ask a couple of questions about goats. Goats are not in this package and in this package deal. And if you look at goat prices, you'll know why they didn't have as a big decline as the rest of like hogs and sheep did. And matter of fact, actually probably climbed up a little bit during this time period. So goats are not in this. And so we're going to just talk about hogs and sheep. And there are some similarities between hogs and sheep and cattle. And then there's several differences. And so we're going to go into this. First of all, hogs and sheep are just like cattle from the standpoint, there are two parts involved in determining your payment. One is the number of animals you sold between that January 15th and April 15th date. And two is the highest animal inventory between April 16th and May 14th. And that's where the similarities kind of end between hogs and sheep and cattle, but that's both the same. And so when we look at hogs, they broke those up in only two classifications, and they call them hogs, which are swine that weigh over 120 pounds, or pigs that weigh, then those are swine that weigh under 120 pounds. So if I'm a hog producer, those sows and boars that I have that are well over 120 pounds, and if I sold any of those during that time period, I would get that CARES Act money. That's $18 a head. But if I didn't sell any of them, and I'm just counting them in the inventory part, then I'd get $17 a head in that CCC money. Now, pigs, those swine under 120 pounds, those could be, feeder pigs, or actually, if you had a litter of pigs born during this time period before April 16th, you're going to be able to count those in the inventory as well. But if you sold any pigs under 120 pounds during that time frame, the CARES payment kicks in at 28, and the CCC payment's at 17, for the same as the bigger pigs. Now, when we switch over to sheep, the big difference in sheep compared to both hogs and cattle is that we're only allowed to count the sheep that we either sold or have on hand that are under 2 years of age as of January the 15th. So if we've got our ewe flock out there, that could be averaging 3-4 years, just say 3-year-olds, they are not going to count, and they're going to not receive any payment based on that inventory or any sales. It's only sales and inventory of those sheep that are under 2 years of age. And then so if we sold any sheep, we get a bigger payment of $33, and our inventory is only worth $7 a head. As Director Biggs has mentioned before, these numbers are self-certified, and so all you need to know is you need to know your numbers. But I will encourage you to make sure that you have proof or verification just in case you're asked for it at a later date. So I'm a little lazier than Scott is. Instead of making up new tables, I decided to just go ahead and screenshot the spreadsheet that FSA has put together. And in here in this hog example, let's just say I'm a producer. I have 10 sows, and I got 10 pigs that are under 120 pounds on hand. And then I also sold 20 pigs during that time frame, and 10 of them weighed over 120, and 10 of them weighed under 120. And so you can kind of look and see the difference. on the hog side of it, it really didn't make it that big a difference in the payment versus selling versus inventory. But on the pigs sold, selling the pigs under 120 pounds was a larger payment than what the pigs that are on inventory. So you can kind of see here, the difference between the two. And that's all you need to know for your pigs is just one, how many you sold and what their weights were when you sold them. And then how many you have on hand, or the highest number you have on hand between that date. So when we look at lambs, and again, it's lambs and yearlings that are less than 2 years of age. So all I did is put these on the same line. Let's just say I had 10 ewes and sold 10, and compare that to selling 10 lambs. So the 10 ewes I'm talking about are just replacement ewes that are under 2 years of age. So for that inventory number, I only get $7 a head, so $56. But for those 10 lambs that I sold on March 15th, I get $33 a head, which what I like about the spreadsheet, and it's really nice, is I don't have to worry about that 80% rule. It calculates it for me. So instead of it showing $330, it shows $264, which is 80% of the money. So when you see here with lambs, there is a big difference between the inventory money and the sale money. So next, I'm going to talk about dairy, and I realize there's probably not, a single dairy out there, but I will tell you. So the question was asked, and this dairy program only refers to cows, cow's milk, not goat milk, not sheep milk, or any other type of dairy operation. We're only talking about cows. And dairy program is probably even a little more simpler than, or it is simpler than the sheep and goats and cattle, from the standpoint, all you need to know is your production in the first quarter of 2020, and that's what you're going to get paid on. So for my example, I just used 100 cow dairy producing 2,000 pounds of milk per cow per month. So we multiply 100 cows by 2,000, come up with 200,000 pounds of milk per month. We put that in the calculator, and you can see we get we have still two different groups, but it still calculates the same, but basically it comes down to almost $30,000 that we would get for that milk production. And again, the spreadsheet calculates it for us and makes it pretty simple. So again, all we need to know is our production for January, February, and March. Okay, and we'll switch gears a little bit. If nobody's got any questions, and Amy, you have to tell me if they are, because my box is not closed. And I'm going to switch over to specialty crops. This one is a very interesting program from the standpoint, just the number of crops that it covers. There are 44 crops listed, and at the top of the listing, it says these are, include these, but are not limited. So again, this can change. And so I couldn't put all 44 crops on one screen, so I just kind of picked out 3 that I thought are most relevant here in Oklahoma. Pecans, and I know we do a little bit of onion production, and then maybe some lettuce. Some folks are producing some of that lettuce. And, there's 41 other crops out there that are available. But the thing that's interesting about specialty crops is the number of payments that could be possibly available. There are 3 parts to this. So when we talk about it, part 1 are the crops that are sold between January 15th and April 15th. So if I'm a pecan producer and I sold some of my pecans after January 15th and before April 15th, I'm going to be eligible for a payment. You can see down there, example, of 28 cents a pound for what I sold. Now, if I sold my crop before January 15th, I'm eligible for nothing on that part of that crop. So, and then the second part is crops that may have gotten harvested and shipped out, but spoiled due to the loss of marketing channels. Now, pecans are probably not a great example to use for that, because they got cold storage. They're not going to spoil. But if a lettuce crop, if we shipped it out with its expectation of it to go into the market channels and be sold, but it sat in the place that you shipped it to until it rotted and was unsellable, then you're going to get a payment for that. And actually, part 2 payments are the largest part for the specialty crops. And for pecans, if it happened to work that way, you'd actually get 93 cents a pound for that portion of the crop. Now, part 3, again, is a little more difficult to understand from the standpoint of the way it's stated. It's unpriced crops that were not harvested and did not leave the farm between January 15th and April 15th. And when we talk about not harvested, it has to be for the reason that it wasn't harvested was there was no buyers available to purchase that crop. It couldn't be that the price was so low you didn't want to take it, or maybe conditions weren't good enough, too wet maybe here in Oklahoma that we couldn't get it done. So maybe that that was a reason, but that may not qualify us for that part 3. And again, but if we do have any crops that can qualify for that, and again, the word unpriced, so you can't have them forward contracted. But if we do have some of those, then we could actually get a payment of about 18 cents a pound for those pecans. And those are the 3 parts, and you add those 3 parts up, and that's the total payment that you would get. And so again, it's going to be a little different for everybody, and everybody's going to have to kind of, have their records available, and know what you sold between those dates, what you harvested but spoiled, and then what you didn't harvest because there wasn't any buyers. So with that, I am done. Are there any questions?
So I haven't seen any questions to start, but actually, and this might be a question for Josh, I actually got an email question between the 2 webinars that was asking the question about that unharvested inventory for pecans. And if they did have them in cold storage, how does that factor into these 3 pots of money? But the specific example was they would have shipped it to a restaurant or to a bakery, I mean. Bakery wasn't using as much as normal in that time frame, so they weren't able to sell it.
I got the exact same question, Amy, from a producer here locally, and that's something I'm gonna have to get an answer to. If you want to forward me that email, I'll try to respond to that producer when I get a good answer, because I've got a producer with the same. They were
okay, it was an educator, but yeah, I'll forward her email to you.
Please, and I'll try to get an answer, because like I said, I had a producer. They've got it in cold storage right now, but it was not sold either. So I'm going to have to get some clarification on that before I can give a good solid answer on it.
Seeing no other questions for JJ, Trent, do you want to get your slides loaded up for the crops to wrap us up this evening?
JJ felt like he got the short straw. I must have definitely got the long one, because the non-specialty crop part, as Director Biggs said earlier, isn't very complicated at all. I think it'll be pretty easy for you guys to go ahead and work through some of these problems, and I promise I'll have us out of here at the 1.5-hour mark. So non-specialty crops here that are going to be important for Oklahoma, I would say the major ones that qualified are corn, sorghum, soybeans, and cotton, or at least that'll capture the majority of our acreage. And that will be paid on, like we said earlier, unpriced crop in storage as of January 15th of this year, or 50% of our 2019 production, whichever is less. And that unpriced part comes into play. Not under forward contract would be my suggestion as to what that means. If you have grain under contract to sell in the future, or it has been sold since that time, that probably isn't going to count. But if it's just sitting in open storage or sitting in storage on your farm and it has no price contract on it, you're good to go on those bushels. Now, if you're hedged or anything like that, still not considered priced. It has to be what I would consider a forward contract that has your cash price set to be priced. So I hope that makes sense. So here's the grain commodities that are going to be, and our cotton down there, that's going to be of interest to our producers. And there's 2 different prices that go into this. So like taking corn, for example, will be on corn right here. So it's in bushels here in the units. Some of you sorghum producers might not be used to seeing bushels all the time if you're used to hundredweights, but sorghum there is in bushels. So like, for example, on corn, if we come over here, the CARES Act payment rate is going to be 32 cents, and the CCC payment rate is going to be 35 cents. This is because there's a approved loss on these commodities based on the average prices during the 2 time periods that were calculated. And CARES Act money pays 50% of that loss. CCC money pays 55% of that loss. So that's why you see 2 different prices there. And you get a simple average of these 2 numbers to get the payment rate on the eligible bushels. So again, we have corn there. Canola, very small payment here of 1 cent per pound. We got millet notes there as well, might be of interest to some people. Sorghum, 30 cents and 32 cents there, so we get an average price of 31. And then soybeans coming in at 45 cents and 50 cents, so an average price of 47.50. And then cotton as well, 9 cents a pound, 10 cents a pound, so 9.5 will be roughly our payment rate on those commodities. So this is the tool. I'll look at what you'll see if you download that Excel tool. And I just came in here I included corn, sorghum, soybeans, canola, upland cotton, millet, oats, barley for malting, and sunflowers, just all those major ones in there. And this helps you go through what's eligible. And I just threw in a number here for 2019 production of 10,000 bushels or 10,000 pounds. I kept it all the same. And then I came in here and put in my 2019 production that's not sold as 1,000 bushels. So if this column is going to be less than 50% of our total production in 2019, we get paid on the lesser of those 2 numbers. So here 1,000 is going to come in, and I used 1,000 just to keep calculations simple so you guys can kind of do math in your head, thinking about what you have in storage yourself. So for corn, looking at 1,000 bushels in storage, our CARES Act money is going to pay $128 on that 1,000 bushels. And it's going to pay $140 from CCC payments. And this is automatically calculated 80%, so the full payment would be another 20% on top of that, but this is the only money we have guaranteed coming in right now, so we're going to go with that. So the total payment on 1,000 bushels of corn in storage as of January 15th that has not been priced would be $268. Of other interest, coming down to look at soybeans here, so again, $180 coming from CARES Act money, $200 coming from CCC. We get a total payment of $380 if we have soybeans in storage as of January 15th. I keep saying that because very rarely do producers have a whole lot of fall crops in storage. We tend to market those pretty quickly, especially looking at corn in Oklahoma. If we harvest that in August, we tend to have a basis premium compared to other areas of the country, and a lot of that crop gets sold early. So might not affect a lot of bushels in Oklahoma. It may. It just depends on who you are. But for those of you with open storage, it's going to be very important. So just as an example here, if I wanted to change something, if you were to say I had 10,000 bushels of 2019 production in corn and say I had 7,000 bushels in open storage, I'd only get paid on 5,000 bushels because that would be half of 2019 production. So I hope that makes sense to you all. I'm not going to beat this into the ground too much. That tool is out there, and you can look up all of these numbers there.
Trent, you did have a question. So
Yeah.
basis contracts would still be eligible?
Basis contracts only? That's going to be another question for FSA, I think, because that's half of the price. Well, not even half, but it's a portion of the price being set, but you don't have, I'm guessing you don't have the futures locked in. Very interesting question, but I don't have an answer for you. And I'm not sure if Director Biggs can come in and answer that for you. But if it's not totally priced, I would still say that's almost a hedging strategy, but I'm not sure. Should I move on, Amy?
Josh or Scott, do you want to weigh in on that one before we move on?
I'm working on it right now.
So I'm going to move on as
go
they're
ahead and
thinking
move on,
about
please.
that, and then we can talk about it at the end. So very quickly, I just went through and looked at the 2 different time periods for the price calculations on a few commodities here. I have soybeans on this example. So this would be the first time period that they looked at, and then we're going to come over here and look at the second one as indicated by these orange boxes. The blue lines here at 949 and 848 indicate the highest price in that first time period and the lowest price in the second time period to kind of give you a range of prices during that time. But remember that the prices they used were weekly averages. So if the weekly average of the first box minus the weekly average of the second box indicated more than a 5% 5% loss on that commodity, it counted. So here we can see obviously that soybeans saw a pretty big decline, and they went ahead and qualified for this program. Looking at corn here again, that first box and the second box, again, a stark decline in prices there. Seeing prices fall from a high of $3.90 down to $3.25 made sense that this commodity did qualify. Some people wondered why hard red winter wheat did not qualify, and that would be showed here with our first box over here in our second box. Hard red winter wheat saw a nice price increase here after about mid-May, rising up due to some fundamental things in the market and some wheat that got sold worldwide and some other things that caused wheat to go up. Ended up where our highest price we saw during that time period, or that first time period, was 504. The lowest during the second was 467. If you figure the percent change in those two prices, it's a little bit more than a 5% loss. But again, as I said earlier, we're talking about a weekly average, and that weekly average was not greater than a 5% loss. I think Director Biggs said somewhere around 2.5%, which I seem to remember that being what I got whenever I calculated a few days ago. So that's kind of why it happened. Arbitrary dates a little bit there, outside of our control. We're just telling you what happened, and that's the way it worked out for hard red winter wheat. And Amy, that's really all I have. I think that one is fairly straightforward. I'm glad to answer questions if anyone has any, though, if I can. That basis contract one is very interesting.
So while we have a few folks typing in their questions around crops, we'll circle back around. Director Biggs, do you want to address this question on calculating inventory that was in the Q&A?
Sure, and it's dealing with calculating inventory, January 15th plus calves born between January 15th and May 15th. And that is correct. They do have to have been born between those dates, and they will be eligible for both. Well, I take that back. Anything not sold will be eligible for that $33 head for your highest inventory. Anything sold is only for the first part of the livestock program.
So the only other question we have outstanding at the moment then is that question on basis contract eligibility. And I don't know if you guys had a chance to consider whether that's something you want to answer now or maybe do on an email later on if you need to ask some additional questions. But that's the only other one we have outstanding right now.
And that is the other, we have not received that question at all today. So that's one we're going to have to get back to you. Be more happy to get you an email out tomorrow.
I will ask you, Jordan, was that a basis contract on 2019 production that now that actual production is still in storage? Give you a second to type that in.
While he's typing that in, this is your moment, folks, to put any questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. So please go ahead and do so. Trent, did you see that answer you got?
Yeah, I see it. I think it's still going to require a follow-up there, but the production isn't completely priced. It isn't. So that'll be something for FSA to look into, though.
Amy, while people think of some more questions, I'm going to go ahead and launch do our little polling question. And so, guys, I'm going to put a question up on the screen. You'll be able to answer and click on it. And so it's pretty simple. And, after attending this webinar, do you feel like you can apply for the CFAP program? If so, just, yes, no, or unsure. Give you a minute or so to answer that question for us, and we appreciate it. your honesty on this deal. That helps us with our planning and stuff, and do our meetings. So.
And just JJ, while that folks are filling that in, just a reminder that we are going to try to send the that tool out to everyone, the actual Excel spreadsheet that was shared by FSA for everyone who attended the seminar. Did we get that figured out?
Yeah, I mean, what we'll do is we'll get the emails kind of put together and send it out, probably an email blast, either tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon at the latest. So takes the computer a minute or two to compile that stuff. So all right, we'll go ahead and end the poll, and so if anybody's got any questions or any more questions, we'll stay here and answer them. But if not, we can sure enough end this and let everybody get along with their evening. So. Any more questions? Is there a cutoff date? There is a cutoff date. Well, I can't off the top of my head. Yeah.
I was just going to see if Josh wanted to answer that one.
August 28th is the last date for it.
August 28th, but I want to stress to everybody to get your applications in. Oklahoma has a goal of getting these applications in and out in 4 to 5 weeks. So while the application process can last until August, get them in as quick as possible and we'll get money out the door even quicker. What I don't want to have happen as people hold their applications, anticipate some other benefits, some other programs, some expansion. If there is an expansion or something new is added, we can always go back and amend the application, issue another round of payments. But I would stress, get on these as quick as possible, get them in, and we want to get this money out as quick as possible. We have a goal of 4 to 5 weeks.
All right. So you got a question that said, Gayla asked if will this be on YouTube? Gayla, yes. As soon as this kind of the computer compiles all this and then I get sent over to our video people, we will have a link and have that available have this session available for anybody who wants to watch it again or watch it for the first time.
So Josh, there was a question in the chat that might be good for you. Is the WIP Plus programming getting put on the back burner for this?
We're not necessarily putting it on the back burner. Now, the WIP Plus program has not had a specified ending sign-up date yet. So we are trying to focus on CFAP, one, because we do have an end sign-up date, and two, because we want to get this money out as soon as possible to try to help producers. We're gonna manage it as best as we can with what we're dealing with not being able to bring people into office, and with only being able to have one person in the office at the time, and we're teleworking with the others. Kind of limits to I'm not going to say we're as productive as we could be if we were all in the office working. If we, I'm not going to say that we're not going to work on WIP Plus, but we are going to try to focus on getting as many people paid as possible with the CFAP program right now.
All right. Any more questions?
Looks like there's one more for cattle. Is the 102 and 139 for cattle sold only? I believe the answer is yes.
Yes. Yeah, because the only payment over $33 is for sold. If it's 33 is inventory and everything else is sold. So. Any more questions? Put my video back up.
Yes, payments based on inventory sound complicated, but it's 33 across the board. So kind of
count noses.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how that gets all. If that's just an accounting thing to know the difference or what.
All right,
that heifers thing's pretty interesting.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, if that's it, I believe I'm going to stop the recording. And so appreciate everybody showing up. And again, if you ever got any questions, OSU and FSA are here to help. You know, and that's what we do, and that's why we do what we do. So just give us a call, or yeah, give us a call and email us right now because we can't have visitors in the office. So thanks a lot, guys.